All right, well, there's lots to discuss, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in, and we'll get everybody caught up as they join here. So today, following our usual agenda, this is mostly a Q&A review just based on where we're at in this timeline, but I can go through a couple administrative updates, talk you through where we're at with the opportunity. Our weekly topic is going to be diving into those Q&A because there were a couple, not game changers necessarily, but a couple things I wanted to make sure everybody's tracking. And then we'll open it up at the end for any Q&A. So I don't know if you can relate to this this picture. This is how I feel some days. We have a few things looming here that we know are going to drive more changes to this proposal, but hopefully everybody feels like they're in an okay place for where we're at, because we have been keeping the press up all along here. So I did want to mention we do have an updated file tracker that's going to be on the Information Hub, and because GSA did not do this for you, we have broken Section K out from Amendment 2. Now, the big caveat here is that you actually shouldn't fill Section K out just yet. We're going to wait until we get Amendment 3 just to make sure nothing in that section changed. I don't expect that anything did, but in the Q&A, GSA did reconfirm that, yes, you should use the most current version of the solicitation. So we will do that extraction for you, and we will post the specific Section K sections for each RFP on the Information Hub so that you can go there and download them. Because remember, you have to submit Section K of the proposal, your annual reps inserts, and then within Symphony, you need to certify what size you are based on your annual revenue and the number of employees at your company. So there's a 3-format requirement for reps inserts. In terms of opportunity updates and the timeline where we're at, right? So yesterday, obviously, we got the second batch of Q&A. Tomorrow there's a webinar all about OSP. That's the online submission portal, right? So Symphony, they're doing another walkthrough of how to tag things, how to upload things. I haven't seen an updated agenda for that. I know a lot of it has just been basic familiarity, but I would suspect that they're drilling down into some of the other sections. For what it's worth, I asked some questions during the first webinar that still haven't been answered, so I don't know. I don't know how valuable those will or won't be. I would, of course, encourage you to reach out to your Trident rep if you have questions about Symphony and how to upload things or how to tag them. And usually we can work through things a little bit more efficiently. One of the most interesting things to come out of the Q&A update yesterday was the fact that GSA said that they intend to release Amendment 3 on Thursday of this week. So just in time for the 4-day weekend or the 3-day weekend, depending on where you're at, or the no-day weekend. Hopefully that's not the case, but right before Labor Day, they're going to drop this amendment with the last batch of Q&A. And they did acknowledge that they're considering an extension. I find it a little bit curious that they're not going to reveal what their thoughts on that are until Thursday. So I'm not sure what's holding up the decision, but we're standing by for that. Until we get it, though, we're proceeding as though this is all going to be submitted by the 13th of September. So I have my little question mark there, but we'll see if that holds. I do think there's still a lot we can do ahead of time, so that in that final week, whenever it is, it's really just final QCs, getting the SF33s signed, and making sure everything's up to date in terms of documentation uploads. So this is just a different view of the calendar and where we're at, right? So obviously today is the 29th. You should be working through some of these pre-upload reviews with your Trident SMEs at this point. So I know that not all of the JP3s and JP6s have come back signed, but if you've sent them out and you haven't gotten them back, this is a great time to talk to your points of contact and just make sure that they're tracking, that they don't have questions, because you're going to feel a lot better once you get those signed documents in hand. And also, we just want the assurance that they're going to come back validating the credits that we think they're going to. And we'll talk through some of the evidence and credit things as we get into the Q&A. But in terms of what's coming next, so Labor Day is on Monday. So again, this is a great time this week, today and tomorrow, to remind your reps. Hopefully they can get things back to you before the long weekend, because everybody's going to be busy next week, digging out of their inboxes. And we just want to be poised with as much pre-work done as possible so that in that final week, whenever it is, we're just adjusting to little last minute SF33s and final signatures on things. Okay, so jumping right into significant and or interesting Q&A / maybe some annoying Q&A that were in here. I looked a couple different ways at how to group these, and I just decided that we would go in numerical order so that you can track back to the Q&A documents as well, because their groupings were a little bit all over the place. So we might skip around on topics a little bit here. I'm going to apologize in advance for that. just for clarity, we're going to go sequentially through the Q&A and drop anchor on the ones that I think are worth having a quick conversation around. So number 15, this isn't anything earth-shattering, but I did just want to bring everybody's attention to the fact that GSA is reserving the right to have discussions before they do their final awards, but they're really not planning to conduct discussions. So this question came up in the light of, hey, what if GSA disagrees with something that we've claimed? Are they going to come ask us about it? And GSA is saying, nope, not really planning on doing that. So this just goes to show that the evidence that we're submitting really needs to be locked tight, right? You need to make sure that it's going to be interpreted the way that you think it's going to be interpreted when you're not in the room to explain it, because you likely will not be afforded that opportunity when it comes to the project claims. Now, the good news is that in question 18, the GSA actually said that offers are encouraged to utilize comments in supporting documentation, indicating specific reference for verification purposes, and you can include additional details to assist the government in verifying the claimed elements. So if there's something that you need to point out that was fat-fingered, or that if you're asking them to make a leap of faith where they need to look at 3 pieces of evidence to get the big picture, you can provide those instructions in the tag. Our guidance all along has been, don't rely on those tags to point out any new information. And I think that that's still good guidance. You have your relevance section if you need to talk about domain relevance. LCATs should be pretty explanatory, although we're going to talk about those in a little bit. Functional areas, right? So you can add a little bit of commentary in those comments or things that help clarify, but I wouldn't make new claims in those comments. So if you have questions about that, talk to your Trident rep. We can look at specific examples based on your situation. A lot of questions around the pricing module that actually came out with the first batch of Q&A, but in question number 28, they asked again about the escalation factor being included in year 1. And really what I thought the interesting part of the takeaway was in their answer was that they think that the evaluations, contract awards, and notice to proceed issuances are going to take about a year. So if this goes in September of this year, things are going to start happening by September of next year. So it's just always interesting to see a little bit of insight into what GSA thinks the timeline is for the flash to bang of contract award to actual execution, or I guess between proposal submission and award and then execution. So wanted to provide that context. Okay, so question 34. This one was interesting because of the answer that GSA provided, right, where the offer or a bidder said, can you confirm that the government is keeping with these pools, and then basically if you're in the pool you can bid on anything within that pool. And GSA said this in a few different places, that no, this is a new structure. The OASIS Plus contract is not operating like the old OASIS contract. So what's really important to understand here is that you first have to qualify for a domain, right? So first you're going to select which IDIQ you're responding to, whether that's unrestricted or one of the small business set-asides. And then within that IDIQ, you're going to pick your domain. And then underneath that domain, you still have to make sure that you are registered and in the correct representation for each one of those NICS codes, which are going to become CLINs. So the way that they're going to award it to you is you'll get your IDIQ contract award that correlates to small business, women-owned small business, service-disabled, veteran-owned small business, whatever your category is. And then it'll say in the M&A and T&E domains, or whichever ones you qualified for. And then underneath the M&A, you're only going to get the NICS codes where you're actually a small business. So this is a really important distinction to understand, that it's not just a blanket, hey, if it's M&A, you can bid on anything that comes out in that M&A domain. There's still going to be restrictions at the task order level for what you're actually competing for. Okay. Question number 48. Will the government confirm the JP3 is acceptable documentation for a federal government subcontract to establish NICS PSC for automatic relevance? No, is the short answer here, right? Really just wanted to foot stomp that non-federal projects, including federal subcontracts, are ineligible for this automatic relevance consideration, and you have to use the standard relevance verification section, L.5.2.3.1.2. And really, this is where that JP3 comes in. This is why they want to see the statement of work. You're not just going to be able to say, hey, I'm claiming the same NICS code as the prime because they had an engineering task order, and so my subcontract was therefore also engineering. You're going to have to rely on what's actually in the subcontract and what you were actually engage to deliver. I think it is not a bad thing if your subcontract includes a NICS code from the prime, but just know that GSA is not accepting that as a path to automatic relevance. You're still going to have to do some substantiation and a little bit of homework in proving that your project actually aligned to that domain. There were a lot of questions around surge and what's actually required to prove that credit area. And we've, again, said this from the start, that surge is going to be really tricky to prove because you're having to compare different values. You're having to show that something not just happened in a short compressed timeline, but that it wasn't originally planned. There's all these conditions that come into play with the surge credit. And so I thought the way that they explained it in this question was pretty clear, that in order to demonstrate qualifications for surge capability, you have to provide documentation that shows the work was funded and executed via a modification or order on the original contract, or you have to have formal contracting officer authorization to the original contract vehicle, such as a notice to proceed. And if the contract documentation does not unequivocally demonstrate that surge happened, then you can, in addition to those things that you provided up above, use the JP3. And this is just an interesting nuance, because depending on how you interpret this question, you could make an argument that the JP3 is not going to be the magic claim all button for this. You still have to provide something that shows the increase of effort with the short lead time. And then again, I think we cover this in some of the subsequent questions and answers. The surge can't just be carved out of the contract. Like, it actually has to have been executed in order to get the credit. Moving on to question number 66. So the GSA just did the math for us here in terms of the 5-year recency. So they said, yes, anything completed from June 15th, 2018 on is acceptable. So again, nothing earth-shattering there, but just in case you feel better seeing it in writing, June 15th, 2018 is your 5-year mark for your recency window. Okay, let's see what's on the next slide here. Make sure I didn't skip. Okay, question number 67. Question number 67 and question number 81 really made me grit my teeth a little bit. And here's why. So there's slightly different language in this answer than what you see in the RFP. So these questions both relate to qualifying project experience and getting credit for integrated experience that you're claiming 5 or more distinct labor categories for, right? In the Q&A, they say the contractor is required to map the labor categories to the standardized labor categories and the seniority levels in attachment J1. And any verifiable contract documentation, as well as PWS SAO outlining the different functional areas for integrated experience for that QP could be used as verification of multiple labor categories. This will make a little bit more sense when we get to question 81, but I think what they're looking for, not that they've done a great job explaining this, is I think we've got a little bit more burden to prove that the labor categories we're claiming actually have distinct levels. If you remember back to previous iterations of the RFP, at one point they said, hey, there has to be at least 3 years between different seniority levels, right? They removed that language. So if you've got a data analyst level 1 and a data analyst level 2, those could still be considered distinct labor categories, but now you have a burden to show that level 1 correlates to a junior labor category and level 2 coordinates to or tracks to a mid-level labor category. So I think you might have a little bit more homework to do in certain cases if you're using integrated experience credits proved by 5 or more LCATs, and your LCATs don't cleanly map to the way that the seniority levels are broken out in the J1, or if you have names of labor categories that are very close. I don't think this is a problem if you've got really distinct, clear labor categories where you've got a program manager, a software engineer, a data analyst, a Intel advisor. Like if things are very clearly different functions, I think you're probably okay to not go down to this level of mapping. But if you're trying to show the distinction within one labor category and their different levels, I think it would behoove you to say, hey, by the way, in my amplifying notes, junior for this contract was 3 years or less of experience. Senior was, level 2 was 5 or more years. Senior level 3 was 10 or more years. Just doing a little bit of that exposition for GSA so that they can confirm that, yes, it tracks to their J1 with their terms, and these things are in fact distinct. Okay, the question number 72, this was all about the first tier subcontractor teaming partner verification and corresponding to the contractor task order of the QP. So here's what's interesting about this. You can use an invoice to show a subcontracting relationship, right? But you don't actually have to provide that. So you don't have to prove that any funds ever actually changed hands between you and your subcontractors if you're a prime. So if you have the subcontract, even if you never executed it, technically you're still going to get credit because there's no burden to say, and by the way, we did at least $1 of business. Nope, you just got to have the subcontract that lists the project and the terms of the agreement and the two parties and what it was established for. So yeah, no proof of actual tasking required. Okay, so here we are back at 81, right, where GSA says, look, you must map the LCATs to their QPs, or to the LCATs, excuse me, and levels provided in attachment J1. So this question, the way that they asked it, right, they have master schedule level 5, schedule level 3, schedule level 2. That doesn't necessarily correlate to junior, senior, mid, journeyman, I guess is journeyman, or journeyman, junior, senior, SME, like the four categories that they use in the J1. So in this case, if your labor categories are labeled like this, where the levels are numbered instead of labeled by seniority, you might have a little bit more homework to do. We would recommend doing a little bit more homework to just prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that these are in fact distinct labor categories. Okay, another question about surge with number 93, right? Can you just show FPDS modifications over time and claim that as surge? Or, what if our surge CLIN was funded? Does that count as proof? And GSA has said that overall funding changes in and of themselves are not sufficient to show surge. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. But if you have a funded surge CLIN, then that does meet the requirement. So a surge CLIN would be acceptable provided it was executed and funded via order or modification to the contract and not funded at the original contract award. So if you've got on your base contract award a surge CLIN and it says TBD or not separately priced, or something that leaves the price out, and then you've got a modification later that executes that surge and you can show that dollars were actually obligated against it, you're okay. I would still get the JP3 signed, though, just to close that door entirely. Okay. Number 127. Will the government accept qualifying project experience to be a collection of task orders performed as a subcontractor, another prime contractor's master contract, BPA, or BOA? The government said no. I'm not 100% sure what they were trying to get to when they asked this question. If it was, hey, can we show all of our subcontracts that were incrementally funded as a collection and call it a collection of task orders? Or, are they really just asking if they can aggregate these projects? But the government has come back and said, look, if you're trying to do this, your subcontracts are not task orders awarded under U.S. federal government single award IDIQ, so they're not considered a collection of task orders. It doesn't say you can't aggregate them. It's just saying this is not considered a collection of task orders. That is a very specific term that we are using in the solicitation. So for this example, the subcontracts would be non-federal subcontracts, which that's not the part I have issue with. It's really, I feel like they haven't answered the question very directly about being able to aggregate subcontract work. And there's another question that refers to that a little bit later on. Okay. Question 130. We talked about this a little bit in previous webinars, but they said within the domain scoring in Symphony under projects and past performance, there's a selection option for qualifying project, right? So you can select what projects or how you want Symphony to grade your projects. Are they qualifying projects? Are they relevant? Are they federal experience projects? What do you want these to be attributed to? And then the bidder points out that if you select one of the boxes, it makes you put in a file, but there's no guidance about what files do you want to see for a QP, right? Well, like, what are you looking for here? And so what do we do for this section? And GSA has said the dropdown is used to select all documents required for verification of any of the claimed credit. under the qualifying project if it's not already applied under one of the other sections in the performance factors. This is not a great answer. I think what they were trying to say is you need to show us the files that make this a QP. So if that is your JP6/CPARS to show that you've got a positive record of past performance, if it is your FPDS record, if it's your contract award document, if it's your JP3, whatever we need to verify that this meets the definition of, say, a QP, those are the things you need to put there. That could lead to a little bit of rework. I would say that the takeaway here is that for any of your QPs, when you select a project as a QP, at a minimum, you need a contract award or FPDS equivalent, and you need a JP6 or a CPARS equivalent. So there's going to be those two things, the things that describe the project, and it's the fact that it's services based and within the period of performance and meets the total contract value, and then also the document showing that it's got not a negative record of past performance. Okay, so question 139, this goes back to that subcontractor issue. We're a subcontractor to a large business for a federal contract. We provide staffing support. We submit resumes for open positions. If our candidate is selected, we receive a purchase order. How do we calculate annual contract value of this contract? GSA said the purchase orders themselves would be the contract, so you would consider each an individual contract when calculating average annual value. So what they basically said here is, hey, if you just got a purchase order for one person, that's what you have to look at as being your QP. So you can't aggregate these things and say, well, in the course of a year, we provided 12 staff to you. No, each issuance that you got from the prime with this purchase order had a start date, it had an end date, it had a discrete set of tasks. Those are all QPs. Whether or not they meet the threshold is going to be contingent on how many, in this case, how many staff were on there. But this is something to keep in mind, because I think this logic extends to prime contracts where they issue you task orders or purchase orders incrementally. If they're doing it on the annual basis, then those tend to be over the value. But if you're in a situation where you've got QPs that are basically a string of these POs from a prime together, we just want to be really careful with the documentation around that. I think it's still okay if we can reference back to a master subcontract number, or if we can show that each of the POs tracked back to the overall prime contract. But it's really going to depend on how the documentation was issued by the prime. So if you find yourself in a situation where this applies to you and you want a second look, we can definitely give you that review. Question 149, this one just gets on my nerves, because they said, hey, for QP and FEP, one of the criteria is that it has to be a contractor order for services as defined in FAR Part 37. What's the burden of proof here, right? That's what the person was trying to ask. Because if you put your contract in under your company profile, there's nowhere to put in that this is a services-based contract. But when you get to the proposal and you're saying it's a QP, all of a sudden now, yes, I think we have the burden to show that this was a service-based contract. Now, this is not actually going to be an issue for probably any of the projects that you're using. The pain in the butt is that now we have to go tag something or make sure something's highlighted that says that it's a services contract. There's a lot of discussion in the draft RFP Q&A around what makes it services? Does having a statement of work automatically qualify it? Does having a performance work statement automatically qualify it? And the short answer there was no, it doesn't. So if you're using prime work, there's sections of the FPDS record that you can highlight that make it very clear. Or it can be an accumulation of things, right? Because a lot of times the contractor award will say, services set forth in this, right? There are things that call these things service contracts. It's just annoying because now we have to call those out, and there wasn't explicit guidance to do that previous to this Q&A, and it's still not in the RFP. So a little bit frustrating, and probably going to require just a little bit of rework on some of the project documentation. Okay. Question 159, this one gives a nod to the forthcoming Amendment 3, but they said, can you submit the same project as a qualifying project as well as a federal experience project? We're going to get some more clarification here. The short answer is sometimes, but there are limitations on this, right? So you can use QP submissions to demonstrate federal experience within Section L.5.3, as long as the project meets the criteria in Section L.5.3, but there are circumstances where this is prohibited, right? So if you've got a collection of task orders under a single award IDIQ for a federal agency, that's not going to get you credit on the FEP side. If you used one of the distinct task orders, right, if you broke something out, or if there's a task order that you didn't use as part of your collection because maybe it wasn't relevant or maybe you just didn't need it, then you could use that separate single task order as an FEP project if it meets all the other criteria, right? So it's got to be for services, it's got to be within the last 5 years or have 6 months of performance on it. If it's ongoing, it has to be over 250K annually. It's got to meet those criteria, but we'll expect to see some updated language about that in Amendment 3. Okay, another question about surge here, right? So providing a 10% increase in the quantity of services called for in the contract with less than 45 days lead time. Are we correct to understand that a project will be eligible to receive credit for surge points simply by going over budget 10% or by extending a period of performance, which increases the total funding by 10%? Not surprisingly, GSA said no. Like, if a project simply goes over budget of the contract value and it was increased as a result of a period of performance or was increased as a result of a period of performance extension, that's not surge. Surge is also not just rapid mobilization, right? Like if you were asked to do something quickly, or if one phase of the contract went more quickly than another phase of the contract, that's not surge. It might have felt like surge. You might have surged support to do it, but that does not meet what GSA has defined as surge for the purposes of integrated experience credits. Or I guess it's management and staffing credits in this case. Okay, this is another one, question 232. Somebody finally asked it. For the Seaport Next Gen IDIQ vehicle, where task orders are automatically getting the same assigned NICS code as the IDIQ, and all task orders are required to include a particular scope of work based on the assigned IDIQ NICS, can the government please confirm that the NICS assigned at the IDIQ level can be used for auto-relevance? And they said no. There was a significant reorganization in this section in Amendment 2. But basically, if you are using a Seaport task order, then you also need to provide one of the following types of supporting documentation to get that relevance credits. You need the FPDS report and or contract award document indicating the task order PSC, which is designated at the FPDS at the task order level. You need a task order solicitation identifying the claimed NICS code. Or you need some other supporting documentation that all potential NICS codes assigned to the multiple award IDIQ were considered automatically relevant for that domain, or any of the other standard relevance verification. So basically the JP3, right, from section L.5.2.3.1.2. So a little bit more work if you're using a Seaport task order. You can't just claim it as automatically relevant to the T&E domain, because they would all be. Okay. This is a just clarification piece, number 255. There were a lot of questions around this. If you look at the business factors and certification section, so around the ISO certs, around the CMMI, you are supposed to be providing the point of contact to include the name of the certification body and name, address, phone number, and email address of the representative who provided the ISO cert. So if it's not on your certificate from whoever you're investigating or auditing or awarding authority was, you do need to go provide this name, address, phone number, and you can do it as a separate document and basically just combine it with your PDF, or you can upload another document under that certification section. There's no limit to the number of documents that you can upload, but they are looking for this POC information. So you can use an additional document to provide that point of contact information if it's not already on the certificate. I thought question 295 was pretty interesting. They said, does the re-representation only apply to the OASIS Plus prime contractor, or does it also include the first tier subcontractors identified in the original OASIS Plus proposal? And GSA said, no, re-representation only applies to the prime. So if you are teamed with a small business and they go over the small business threshold at some point during the base period, they don't necessarily need to re-represent. Now, there might be requirements at the task order level. So this is not to say that, hey, you don't have to worry about anybody's size but your own after you get the IDIQ. There is always that caveat of task orders could look different or have different requirements, but it's not going to automatically put your contract into dormant status if one of the teammates that you use to get onto the proposal goes up to the next size category. Okay. Question number 312. This is, again, just some reassurance that, can you propose additional subcontractors after award if they weren't included in your original proposal? And are you obligated to team with the teammates that you're naming as part of your OASIS Plus proposal? And GSA has left the door pretty open on this. They said you can use other subcontractors that weren't part of your original OASIS Plus proposal for the actual task orders, and any identification of proposed subcontractors in your OASIS Plus proposal does not result in consent of them performing under any particular task order. It's just addressing a solicitation requirement. So you're not locked in, for better or worse, with the team that you are bidding with or not bidding with for this initial contract award. So lots of flexibility with teaming later on, subject to the requirements of the task order. Okay, this one wasn't particularly illuminating, but again, just pulling these little nuggets out for you, right? 326, if awarded a contract and we want to request another domain, is there an estimated time frame for this new domain to be added? GSA has said, no, we're not providing an estimated time frame for domain enhancement or modifications at this time. Same answer to, hey, if we don't get on for this on-ramp, when's our next opportunity going to be? They have not committed to a specific timeline for that. They have reaffirmed that they intend to do this, and it's going to be more frequent than the original OASIS program. But we don't know if we're looking at 6 months, a year, 2 years. We just don't know what that periodicity is going to be. 327 is important to keep in mind, though. So they talked about, future on-ramps for OASIS Plus domains. Can a prime or sub-bidder use a qualifying project previously used for the initial OASIS Plus bid, whether it is in the same domain or different domain? GSA has said that this would not be allowable in accordance with Section L.4 of the RFP if within the same IDIQ and domain. So if you are getting on a proposal now as a teammate and you've granted the prime to use your project in a T&E small business IDIQ, and later on you want to go get your own bid, they will be tracking what you've already used to process or to submit these proposals. So I was a little bit surprised to see that. I guess I shouldn't be, but they will be cross-checking to see if these proposals have showed up in any other. And again, remember, it has to be the same IDIQ and same domain. That's where you run into trouble. It can be different IDIQs. It can be same IDIQ, different domains, but they will be tracking the reuse of projects as is prohibited by Section L.4. 344 was a good clarification. So we talked about having to do the reps inserts in 3 different formats, right? There's the actual Section K reps inserts. There's your annual reps inserts from sam.gov. And then within Symphony, there's a drop down where you have to select the largest value that your company exceeds for each of the size standards. So, numbers of employees and average annual revenue. And they just wanted to clarify that this is not tied to any NICS code as part of the solicitation. So if you represent it in, whatever your SAM profile shows, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about your entity's overall business size. So whatever your annual receipts are, that's the number that you're selecting there. So you can't just pick the number from your largest NICS code and say that that's what you represent as. It's your actual company's revenue or annual receipts. Okay, and then 363, I thought this was just another good way to explain how this is actually going to work. Because it says, will the government please confirm that OASIS Plus small business awardees will only be eligible to respond to task order solicitations under the chosen order level NICS codes in which they represented as small during the time of the IDIQ, unless re-representation is explicitly required. GSA said yes. How it's going to work is the order and contracting officer, the OCO, is going to select the contract family, which means he's going to say, do I want this to be small business? Do I want it to be women-owned small business? Do I want it to be hub zone? Like, what's my set aside? Then he or she is going to align it to a specific domain. And then within that domain, he's going to designate a specific NICS code. And so you have to, in order to respond to that RFP, you have to have that same contract of that same contract family being utilized by the OCO, the domain awarded on to you that they're competing it in, and the NICS code /CLIN on your contract, or you cannot bid as a prime on that proposal. So again, this shouldn't be surprising to anyone, but it was just good to see this clarified unequivocally that yes, this is how it's going to work when it comes to the actual task orders and how you're going to use these wonderful contracts going forward. Okay. Ending it on a slightly more positive note. I hope we're still not doing OASIS Plus at Halloween, but we are ready if it's still going on then. So any questions from the group? I'm actually going to stop the recording now so we can chat.